Okay, so today we're going to look at writing modern RPG in VS Code and generally doing it very efficiently and quickly. I mean, that's really the goal here, is I want to show how fast it is for us to write RPG, new RPG inside VS Code. And to do that, I'm going to do it locally. So we're going to have, everything is part of a Git repository. We're going to create a new sample database, so we have some sample data to play with. We're going to do some debugging. Everybody loves some debugging, especially me. So what I've got right now inside of VS Code is I have this brand new folder called new vid. I'm not, putting anything in it, and it's not even a Git repository yet. So that's what we'll do. First thing is we'll initialize it as a new blank repository. Cool. So it's got a file in there already, dsstore. I'll just get rid of that because that's just a Mac thing. And what we'll do, second off, I guess, is connect to a system that we're going to work with. In my case, I'm using this one called OSS 7 free dev. I get a couple of messages show up. Yeah, I'm connected. I know my current library, but most importantly is that my deploy directory is not set up. And if I would like to set it up, if I would like to set it as a default, yes, I do want to do that. That really tells VS Code where our source code is going to be uploaded to when we do our compiles. Obviously, very important. Next thing I want to do is create a sample database. I need some sample data to work with. I'd like a fresh library that we can put our programs in. So I'm going to open a new file here, and I'm going to set the language to SQL. And I'm going to call a system procedure in QSys called create SQL, if I can type, sample. And the first parameter is the new schema that it's going to create. So in this case, I'll just call it new vid. That's the same as my local directory name. And I'll let that run. It's going to take a second to run. And while it does that, in the schema browser, there's this plus button at the top. And if I choose plus, I can enter in the actual name of the schema. So in this case, new vid. And that will add it to the list, pretty standard. And if I expand that and expand tables, we'll see that now there's a bunch of sample database tables in there that we can use. I just made new vid right now. So, for example, if I want to see the contents of employee, this is probably the table that we'll work with in this video. But I can expand it here and I can see all of the columns and the keys. I can see the keys are marked with these key icons. It's kind of useful. If I press this little button over here, it's actually going to run the query and hopefully show me the results as well. So if I look at IBM My Results, run that query there, I can actually see the results inside of VS Code. This is especially useful for debugging, and we're going to use this today. Okay, so we've got a sample schema, we've got some data. Let's also set up our library list as well before we move on. So in the IBM I view, we can open up the user library list view right here. First off, I'll set Liam A as new vid, and I will also add it to the library list just because I can. And we'll close these SQL queries now. We don't need those anymore. But new vid is not only a schema. Obviously, a schema is a library, but it's also where I'm going to put my new compiled programs, which is why I set it as my current library too. So back in my local repository, I'm going to make a folder called source. And I'm going to write my very first program. I'm going to call it empfind.pugum.sqlrpgle. And let's start with a very basic template called just the main template that sets the entry point procedure. And we'll just test the compile here. Hello world. We'll save it. Now the first thing it's going to complain at when we try to compile is that there are no compile commands found. This one's really easy. When we develop locally, the compile commands or the actions are defined as part of the repository, kind of like a tasks.json in VS Code. But to get that up, we can open the command palette and search launch actions setup. And from here, we can actually select which languages we're going to work with. So in this case, I'm going to choose free. I'm going to choose RPG, SQL, and service programs, because we might build a service program later on, for example. And when we've got those free selected, you can just hit enter. And what that does is it creates this this JSON file for us, and it has some predefined compile commands. So if I go back to empfind, oh, wrong button. If I go back to empfind, and now if I try to compile it, it will show us the available options that we have to compile the source code. So we'll just want to create a program. Then it's going to ask us how we want to move those files to the server. We can just choose compare. It will do the work for us. So I know the compiler's running. I can see the output spinning down here. I've only just started developing today, so I suspect this system needs some time to wake up. But okay, it compiled. Of course, we can see the spool file. Even though we compiled from my local source code, we still have access to things like the spool file, the job log, so on and so forth, which is really cool. So we know it compiled. That's awesome. And I can show you that as well. If we come back over to the IBM browser and expand the object browser, we can create a brand new filter. So let's do that. And let's call it new vid filter. Oops. And it's for the new vid library. And we want all the objects. Show me all the objects inside of that filter. And you can see here my emp-find program is right there. Nice. Cool. Now let's actually write some code. Let's go fetch some data from that table employee. First off, I'm going to declare a data structure called employee t underscore t for template, because I'm going to create a template data structure. It's going to use ext name, and for employee, that's the name of the object, qualified template NDS. If I can type right, there we go. And then now we can write our select statement. We're not going to use record level access. We're going to use some standard SQL. There's so many ways we could do this, but I'm going to declare another data structure called employee, just simply employee this time. And I'm going to use like ds employee t. So when you use like ds, I think in this instance qualified is implied, so we don't need to specify qualified here. I like to use qualified a lot. We also need a new parameter. We need one for the employee number. So in the employee table, we can look at this again in a minute. In the employee table, there is a key, empno, which is, I think, is a character 6, and we can confirm this in just a second here. So if I pull up the outline view, I can see here that the employee t data structure, obviously based on ext name, has the subfield of empno character 6. That's kind of what I'm using here as the key. So we'll keep that for later. That's cool. Now we can write our select statement based on the employee number that gets passed in. So we can do exec SQL, and we can say select. I kind of need that employee table data up because I won't remember this, but select. Let's say the first name, first NME, last name, and job. Very simple ones. Into employee dot, first name, and then employee dot last name, employee dot job. So we can select it right into those fields that we want. From employee where empno equals employee number. Beautiful, look at that, employee number. And then what we'll do is we'll also check the SQL state here in case no data is returned. So if SQL state is all the zeros, that means, well, that's too many zeros. That means we have data. Awesome. Else, it means we have no data. Excellent. Let's get rid of this hello world. Let's save our code and let's try and compile this. Oh, it actually compiled first time, but you can see right away, if we go to the problems tab, we actually have all of those warnings come up because we're not using some of the definitions, some of the subfields in the data structure, and that's fine. We don't care about those really. So honestly, next best thing that we should do is probably debug it, and we'll do just that. So there's a few ways you can start debugging. You can't just do F5 right now, or can you? Actually, I'm not sure what it will do if I do an F5. It didn't do anything. Probably should set up that key binding correctly, but right now there's two ways. You can actually launch debug. Oh, actually, no, you can't. There's only one way to do it then. It's this button. It's actually right up in the top right. It's the little start with the bug. If I click on that, it's going to show me or ask me what command it's going to use to debug the code. And I actually need a parameter here. Obviously, it takes an employee number. And if I just pass in A, B, C, D, E, F, A, B, C, D, F, E, E, F, then, and I hit enter, it's actually going to start debugging the program, or it's going to set it up on the back end to start debugging it. And then when it's actually running, fingers crossed it does break. The debug job is probably just asleep. Fingers crossed this works, otherwise I have to start recording again. That would really suck. I didn't test this today, so there we go. Nice, nice, nice. Okay, so let's close this. We don't need that open, but break on entry by default. Shift F5 to, not Shift F5, sorry, Function F5 on my keyboard here. And I can see right away, you know, let's close some of the stuff we don't need, but in my debug view here, I can see the employee number that was passed in A, B, C, D, E, F. I can see my local employee definition as well, but there's nothing in it. If we hover over SQL state, we can also see 02000, sorry, has been returned, which means no data has been provided from the last query. So of course, if we step again, it's going to go no data found, and then the program is going to end. Cool. But what if we pass in a valid piece of data, right? So what if we pass in Sally? What if we say all the zeros, free zero? Okay, so let's debug again. Paste it in, hit enter. This time it will probably work a lot faster now that it's kind of ready to go. And I'll let it run to my breakpoint again, and we'll hit the SQL state. And this time we've got all the zeros. We actually have data, which is really cool. So you can see here my employee number over here. You can see that. And if I expand employee, we actually have those fields that I returned. Awesome. Sally Kwan, she's a manager. That's awesome. SQL state, all the zeros. And if I step, we have data. Excellent. Cool. So we've made some progress, all right? We've done a very simple thing. We've made a program that can run a query. Excellent. Let's put this into Git, right? Let's say initial emp find program. Excellent, excellent. Next thing that I actually want to do is move this logic into a service program. You know, I don't generally like to just write SQL over and over again. Sometimes SQL, most of the time, SQL is reusable, right? So what we'll do is we'll make a new file and we'll call it emp.sqlrpgle. Usually helps if I get the extension right. And this will be a no main service program. CTL opt no main. And we'll write one procedure so far, right? The one procedure we're going to write is going to be get employee export nproc. And it's going to have one parameter, really, because what we're going to do is we're going to wrap the logic that does this into the service program so we can just reuse the service program across many places. So declare the procedure, star n for the name, and it's going to return like ds employee t. And we'll come back to defining that later. But it needs a parameter, the employee number, character 6, and const in my instance. Then we need the logic to return it. So let's just go ahead and move stuff from the old program into my service program. So let's copy that over to here. And let's also copy most of this over to here. Now that's pretty much everything I needed, so bring that back up. And then of course the last part is to return the employee. Very good. I wonder if that will do it. So what we'll do now is try and create this as a module, and we'll, at least if it fails, it will tell me that it fails. So let's see how far we get. Apparently it didn't fail. I don't quite believe it, but it didn't. So that's good. Well then, now we need to create a service program. So by default, we do, in the actions we provide a, create service program command, and it just uses export star all for the basics. So, you can change it to use binder source later on, that's fine. But we'll just create this into a service program, and that was very quick. Okay, so we have a service program, and if we go back to our filter and we refresh, we'll be able to see those now. So we can see here I have my emp find program. I didn't mean to click on it, doesn't do anything when we click on it. I have my module and my service program and my regular program. But of course we're missing one very important thing, which is the binding directory. Now, I am going to be lazy, and I am going to pull up 5250 to create the binding directory. I wouldn't necessarily call it lazy. I mean, that's just the way that things are done. It usually helps if I get the password right. Twice in a row, no password right. There we go. Very good. So let's create a binding directory. Okay, we're going to call it my app, and we're going to put it in new vid. Okay, there's my binding directory. Let's do it work. Binding directory entry, and let's say my app in new vid. Let's add one. The object is called emp, right? It's called emp. No. Let's have a look. Did I call it emp? I did call it emp. The type is a star served program in new vid. We should use star level. That's the correct way to do it. Activation star emed. Very good. We have my binding directory now. So let's close that. We don't really need 5250 anymore. We're done with that. So we have, now we can take out all this stuff from the program and use the service program instead. So we'll leave our employee T. We're still going to need to use that. We still need this, but we can take out all of this basically. And we can say employee equals get employee. So notice that I don't have the prototype yet, but it's still actually suggesting to me that I can use the prototype in my program. And that's because it's an auto import. If I hit enter, not only is it going to put the code there for me, but it's also going to declare the prototype in line for me as well, which is actually very useful. And then what we'll do is we'll just display employee first enemy as well. So now if I compile it, obviously it's going to fail, and I'll tell you why it's going to fail. So deployment finished. It wasn't successful, and your first thing actually is because default act group. DFT act group star no. Can't use star yes by default. So if I save it, recompile it again, let it run. So this time we're going to get binding errors. We're not actually going to get real, actual source code issues. We're just going to get binding issues. Now the binding issues don't show up in the problems tab, which is fine, but they do show up in the output terminal. So where you see the spool file, if we scroll all the way to the top, we do see the job log, and we can see a definition not found for my symbol. And that's because really we just need to specify the binding directory. So we can do that in the header, binder my app, save. Compile it again, do the build, and this time it actually compiled successfully, which is kind of cool. So next step, debug it. Let's hit the debug button, and we'll leave the default parameters in as we expect. Let it start running, and you'll see it's going to break on entry like before, and this time it's stepping through my program. So I can see my employee number here. Currently employee is blank, there's nothing in it, but if I step over this, get employee, I'm sorry, is going to return my data, Sally Kwan, manager. Love it. I'm actually very happy with that, how fast we got things going there. So it's really easy to work with service programs, which is cool. Now I'm going to prove it to you. What we're going to do is write one more very, very basic export function. And this time it's just going to be get emp name, just to show you how fast we can produce results here. So end procedure, and let's say declare pi star n. It's going to return just a character 40, which is kind of lazy because we could say like employee first name, but we'll just do this for now. And we'll just copy the employee number from up here. And then really it's very similar to all of this. Just bonk all that down there. But instead of all this, we don't need most of this, we just need the first name. And then we can return employee, not employee T, first enemy. Save. So we have a new export procedure, that's very good. Let's try and compile it and see what it does. Create it as a module. Now, of course, there are many ways of updating the service program as well, but I'm just going to recreate it because this is just for a video, so it's not a big deal. But now we have get emp name, and I want to use get emp name down here. So Let's try this. Let's declare a new variable. Declare standalone character, 40 is fine. And then we'll say emp name equals get emp name. There again, we haven't got the prototype defined locally, but it will import it for us, like so. And it will add it right to the top of the source code. Excellent. So let's save, recompile, create it as a program, compare it. You know what we should have done is also put a display at the end as well for emp name, because then we can set a breakpoint there and debug it too. So let's do that. Set a breakpoint. I can see it compiled. Hit the debug button. Call the program again. And we hit break on entry and we'll step through this time. Shift F10 here. I can see my employee coming back as expected. And if I step again, emp name is still blank. But if I step one more time, Sally comes back as we'd expect. So it's really easy to work with. Yeah, the auto import is a real treat for me. Love it so much. Now, last couple of things, we should make a new commit. So let's say, you know, add emp or add first emp service program. And then the very next thing we should do is move all of these prototypes into a copybook. So let's do that too. Let's make a new folder called headers. This might be your traditional qrpgle ref, for example, or qproto source. I've also seen it as. But we'll just cut this out of here, make a new file, and we'll call it emp.rpgle inc. Paste it in. Oh, can't just paste it in. We need our **free at the top. Then we'll paste it in. Close that. And then we can copy it. Now notice now that I've used copy here, it's actually it's making that suggestion about copybooks that we could include. Because VS Code, when you're developing locally, indexes your whole project. It knows everything and where everything is. So if I include that, it's going to copy the path. It's going to put the path in there. I'll save it. And we should probably recompile it just to be safe. OMG, it failed. What did I do wrong? Oh, I put the semicolon on at the end. Silly me. Let's do it again. There we go. It worked that time. Very good. And you know what we'll do is we'll debug just one more time just to show that it works. Lovely. Step. I can see my employee has data. Step again. Emp name. Sally. Very good. And that's the video. Thanks for watching.